wanted to do this video as a roast, but I've signed an NDA, which means I'm not allowed to. It's a shame because it would have been really funny. For those of you who don't know, my name's Fahad. I'm a junior doctor working in London, and this year I've been examining MMIs at Imperial. Imperial are actually running a mixture of both face-to-face and virtual interviews. I'm going to talk about the virtual ones because I think that's where a lot of people have struggled. Before we do that though, let's talk about the mark scheme. For each station, there are 3 domains in which you have to score well. The content station is marked from 1 to 7. The communication 1 to 3. Your overall suitability score is then based on how you did on those previous 2 domains, giving you a score out of 100. It's important that you realize that these categories actually compare you not to your peers. These domains actually compare you to what they would expect as a first year medical student. I think this is a really unfair comparison, but ultimately that's the game. Essentially, medical school interviews have gotten to a point where they'll start testing you on things that would normally be taught during medical school. I completely disagree with this, but ultimately that's what the game is now. They've also repurposed some questions that doctors actually get asked at their interviews. And a good example of this was the station that I was marking, which was teamwork and leadership. Lots of people struggled with this station, and most people forgot to use the framework STAR. The way that the virtual interviews are done means that you have your questions in advance, you then have to record yourself and then upload it for people like me to mark. It's actually very hard to cheat. Don't even try. It's very obvious. You get flagged up. You don't want that. Tip number 1, people didn't understand what the question was really asking. If a question asks you to give an example of teamwork and leadership, don't literally give an example and move on. You won't score well. You see, in the mark scheme, we're given positive and negative indicators. To bump up your score, you need to give an example, but then reflect on it, even though the question doesn't implicitly say this. Reflect and say how your particular example is relevant to medical school. Lots of candidates were saying they're part of a drama club or a sports team, and then literally moved on to the next question. You have to actually try and understand what the question is really asking. It's annoying, but the sooner you realize this, the more you can practice for it. Tip number 2, when a question starts with what factors, this isn't an invitation for you to regurgitate a list. For example, if they say what factors are important in teamwork or what factors make good communication skills, don't just regurgitate a list. Pick a couple and highlight some examples that emphasize those factors, and then you can talk about how these are relevant during medical school. It's really important that you do that reflective part if you want to score well. Tip number 3, time management. Everyone struggled with this. For my station, you had 4 minutes to answer 4 questions. In fact, out of the 30 that I marked, only 2 kept a time. 4 minutes is tight, and I think having all 4 questions in front of you on a screen is very nerve-wracking. Practice your time management. Tip number 4, your setup. There was one guy who can only presume decided to conduct his interview in a cave and lit himself with what I assumed to be candlelight. He was a brother too. I really wanted him to do well. First impressions matter. The poor guy never recovered. He did not do well in the station. Make sure that you are well lit. And that doesn't mean going out to buy a ring light, but maybe don't pick the darkest corner of your house. The other thing is to look at the camera. I know it's artificial, but I actually think it will help calm you. Instinct tells you to look at the screen, but don't. Look at the camera so it looks like you're talking to the person who's marking you. I think it'll also help you forget about the pressure of looking at those questions on the screen. But to do this, you have to have practiced enough that your timings are spot on. Out of all the people that I marked, only 2 of them had really good eye contact to keep me engaged. Tip number 5, don't show desperation. When your station is finished, you'll have a few moments with a timer starting down that you can take a breather, have some water before you move on to the next station. Do not use this time to then try and go back to the previous question. A couple of people did this. It doesn't look good on you, and also you're then thinking about the previous station rather than forgetting about it and moving on to the next. So it will affect your performance in the next station. Particularly if a station doesn't go well, forget about it, move on. Tip number 6, to be honest, this shouldn't even be a tip. It's common sense. Practice shows. It's very obvious for the examiner which candidates have practiced in front of a camera recording themselves and have watched it back and seen how to improve. Get people to prep you over Teams or Zoom. If you don't do this, you're essentially stopping yourself from getting good marks. It's very obvious if this is the first time you're recording yourself on camera. I get it. It's uncomfortable. Embrace it. You'll get to a point where you may even enjoy it. There was one person whose interview performance I can still remember. It was outstanding. It was very well practiced and rehearsed. Good eye contact, kept looking at the camera, used her hand gestures very naturally. But importantly, she understood the question. Now, she reflected on her experiences of being a captain of a sports team and then using sports to raise money for charity. And there's so much you can talk about here, but it doesn't have to be sports. It could be drama club, chess club, anything. In general, stations regarding why this institution, your work experience, the ethics scenarios, I think there's so much information out there that these are very well rehearsed, very well practiced. But I think people really struggle with the leadership, teamwork stations. To be honest, I do too. I hate them. But those are the ones you really have to practice. They are hard. I hope some of these tips have been useful. Good luck.